The transition to net zero and EVs will never happen in the timeframes proposed by our governments. Whether you like or dislike EVs, there are certain inescapable facts which are being completely glossed over or outright ignored by all those legislating these mad timeframes like 2030 and 2050, and which render these transitions impossible. One main factor is mining, which cannot possibly deliver the amount of raw materials required for this transition in the time proposed. Another major factor, and the one we'll look at today, is how they seem to believe that the electricity grid will just magically accommodate an entire fleet of electric cars and trucks without massive and cripplingly expensive infrastructure upgrades. Not forgetting all those new AI data centres that are popping up, sucking gigawatts out of the grid 24/7, and the fact that we'll have to use electricity for cooking and heating our homes once evil natural gas is banned. Oh, and of course, we can't possibly have nuclear, can we, Chris Bowen, you idiot? Anyone who believes any of this is possible by 2050 is living in a fantasy world. It will never happen. It will be chaos. I just hope you're strapped in for the ride. Welcome back to MGUY, British engineer and lawyer, now Sydney-based YouTuber. Be sure to follow me on the usual socials for more content, links in the description, and please make sure you're subscribed and have enabled all notifications so you never miss out on any future videos. The mining limitations have been discussed on this channel before. There simply isn't sufficient mining capacity to produce all the raw materials for a net zero transition by 2050. Nowhere near. Even ignoring the fact that all of that mining would have to be powered by diesel. Take copper, for example, a key element in EVs, batteries, wind turbines, and pretty much anything electrical. Between now and 2050, i.e. in barely 25 years' time, we would need to mine more copper than the amount that has ever been mined on the entire planet in all of human history. Please explain to me, when mines take a decade or more to establish, how this will happen. Answers in the comments, please. But nobody in power wants to even look at this. They're walking around with their fingers in their ears singing la 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 la, as if it will all just magically happen. To be honest, they don't care anyway. They'll be retired before the shit hits the fan, and they'll leave someone else to clear up the mess. The grid is another story, as today's article from The Hill explains. It just won't happen. Biden's EV mandate relies on pure infrastructure fantasy. If you pay, will they build it? That's one question the Biden administration should have asked itself regarding the electric vehicle EV charging infrastructure needed to accommodate the goal of an all-EV future. One well-publicised infrastructure failure is public EV charging stations along US highways, for which the Inflation Reduction Act allocated $7.5 billion. That federal largesse has resulted in just 8 charging stations being built since the IRA was signed almost 2 years ago. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg has claimed the US will need 500,000 such stations by 2030. To build the remaining 499,992 stations, we will need to build almost 90,000 of them annually. That's almost 250 daily, or more than 10 per hour for the next 5.5 years. Perhaps sensing the absurdity of this pace of construction, Buttigieg claimed that most people will charge their EVs at home. Maybe, but numerous states, including California and New York, as well as the Environmental Protection Agency, have decreed that all heavy trucks, which transport the bulk of our products, including the food we eat, must go electric too. Thus, under the envisioned EV future, a lack of public charging stations will not be a mere inconvenience for holiday travellers. Indeed, it could be a matter of life and death. The lack of public charging stations is just one aspect of the dearth of EV charging infrastructure that will be required. The Secretary has also said that building charging stations is more than just plunking a small device into the ground. He's right. There is a lot more involved, much of which is rarely discussed. For example, even assuming we can build enough new generating capacity to produce the electricity those EVs will need, we will also need hundreds of thousands of miles of new transmission lines to deliver it. They will stretch not only to public charging stations along highways, but also to the local distribution utilities that provide electricity to homes and businesses. For context, only 500 miles of new transmission lines were completed in the US in all of 2022. To handle the increased loads from millions of EV chargers, the nation's approximately 3,000 local electric utilities, which operate the poles and wires running down streets that deliver electricity to individual homes, apartments and businesses, will require major upgrades. That means millions of miles of local power lines will need rebuilding with higher capacity wires. It will require replacing most of the estimated 60 to 80 million electrical transformers with larger and heavier ones. It will mean installing larger utility poles to handle the extra weight. Thousands of new transformer lines will need to be built along US highways to accommodate the electricity demand of the individual EV charging stations. Each requires as much as a modern steel mill. And this is where the whole infrastructure problem collides headfirst with the raw materials problem. Transformers are basically two massive coils of copper wire wrapped around some kind of metal core. They can transform the high voltages in transmission lines down to the low voltages we need for our homes. But there's a problem with those also. Transformers, however, are in short supply, especially the large ones that public EV charging stations will require. Some utilities report waiting up to 5 years for these large transformers to be delivered, most of which are manufactured in Asia, raising a national security issue. The transformer shortage will be heightened by the Department of Energy's requirement that new transformers use a new and more costly form of specialized electrical steel. Transformers also require copper, so do EVs, almost 4 times the copper than conventional vehicles. The US already imports about 80% of its copper. The need for new transformers will require either vastly increasing domestic copper mining, which has been declining for years and is opposed by many environmentalists, or increased reliance on foreign suppliers. Either way, copper prices will increase. Yes, and it will also become extremely scarce given the amount that will be required for all this. And do you ever hear anybody in government actually discuss these issues ever? Of course not. It's far too hard to think about the physical limitations on the fantasy world they have constructed for themselves, so it's ignored. It's an absolute dereliction of duty on the part of politicians to willfully ignore these issues and plough on regardless, wasting trillions of taxpayer dollars in the process. It's quite frankly scandalous. But I will tell you one thing, and that is when fantasy collides with reality, the only ever winner is reality. And the fallout from this disastrous net zero plan will be extremely messy. Let's hope we can pull ourselves back from the brink before it's too late.